Hi everyone, welcome back to Car Chat, and I'm here, and with me today is Scott Mansell. Hello.
Hi Sam, thank you very much for having me today.
And Scott is a driver coach.
Yeah, that's correct.
And YouTuber. And
so YouTube and the driver61.com website as well.
Yeah, I met Scott. I think I must have run into you at the track at some point in time. You've done a bunch of radical coaching, and you've been sort of around when I've been at the track. But we did a day at Bruntingthorpe recently where Scott showed me how much I didn't know about car control, and we had a good hoon around. But do you want to sort of how did you introduce yourself? Maybe say a little bit about what you do, and then maybe how you got into it.
Okay, so I started the driver61.com website 3 years ago now. I've been a driver coach for 15 years. Basically, the first 12 or so years were just coaching at the circuit. Obviously been racing as well since I was 7 years old in go-karts. And started the driver61.com site and created a 25-part tutorial series for racing drivers, as that information wasn't freely available on the internet at the time. So the course goes through learning how to trail brake, understanding weight transfer, everything that you need, at least to know in theory, for driving quickly on track.
Yeah, that's where I first came across your name. I came across because I know your partner in crime at the beginning in this project. I saw the name Driver61 and I saw your tutorials online, and I think I went to your website, and then you said, we're doing this course, and then I looked and it's free. Well, I think most of it is most of it free?
It's all free.
It's all free. Yeah. So it's a whole bunch of, you can describe exactly what it is, but I think you just said it was.
Yeah, it's a 25-part series aimed at racing drivers to get them to understand the theory behind what they're actually doing on the track, because a lot of the time, track day drivers or racing drivers come from driving nice cars on the road, go to a track day and discover that it's a completely different world. So there's various difficulties in making that transition to being a good track driver. And as I mentioned, this information wasn't available anywhere freely, so I produced a load of tutorial videos and put them on YouTube. Yeah,
it was great. I think you did all sorts of things. I mean, it goes full in depth, and it's really in depth into loads of stuff about, it's a big series, so I'd recommend checking it out. But it was the first time I'd seen written down loads of things that I'd sort of been told, but no one, like you said, it's not, that information isn't really out there, or you've got to go really looking. And most people haven't got a clue, I would say. Like, you get a vague idea, you start to get fast, but you're not necessarily sure why you're fast. And I definitely got into, with my driving, I was getting quicker, and I had, a basic understanding of most stuff in my head, or a vague idea of why this might be working, why not that by working. But I didn't have a strategy for approaching a track day or a test day or a race weekend for making myself faster. And I really liked going through your series of how you broke down loads of different aspects of the driving and stuff, which you can then go back and work on individually. Even I came back and played it on the PlayStation and was like, that makes a bit of sense. Like, trying to get it to click. But it definitely takes a lot of time and a lot of practice. But the reason I think I approached you to come and do it is I sort of went through this little course, watched all the stuff, and I'd watched some of your videos explaining different tracks. So there's a whole bunch of videos. If you're going to go and drive at Spa, you can check out one of Scott's videos, and he explains the apex, like how a bit of paint on the track might be slippy or wear, and all that. There's loads of stuff like that I would not even think about at the beginning when you're doing lap one of a track. But when you've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of laps of a track, you start to break it down into these tiny, tiny things. And I know I got tons and tons out of that. But so you said you started off with karting.
Yes, my father made me a go-kart with 3 wheels. It had 2 wheels at the front and a scooter engine at the back, and welded it all together. And I had a little go-kart there, and then had that when I was 4. And then after a year or a year and a half, I'd learned how to get the thing on 2 wheels and try and balance it on 2 wheels. So eventually my parents said enough was enough, and bought me a 4-wheel kart that we took out just on the local parks, because you could kind of get away with that then.
Yeah.
And then when I was 7 years old, I had my first proper cadet kart and started racing that when I was 8. So I had a very fortunate childhood. My family aren't wealthy enough to go through all of the motorsport rankings.
The full ladder.
The full ladder, which I'm sure we'll probably discuss later. But in karting, it was enough, and it was proper lad and dad karting, sleeping in the back of a van, and it was a brilliant childhood, to be honest.
Yeah. And do you think, because it always comes back to, when I'm trying to learn to drive XYZ car fast or whatever, people always say, okay, go and do some karting. Like, everyone says, go and do some karting because it's fundamentally the same or similar. Would you say it's driving a kart, if you can drive a kart fast, very similar to driving a car fast?
I would say you can learn the fundamentals in a kart. So, vision and understanding how to work a chassis, or whether it's a car or a car, to get the most from it. Going through that process as we did when I was working with you, you can learn that. But obviously, there's a lot more going on with a car in terms of the way that the suspension moves, and obviously being in something that's a bit more powerful and quick. So yes, it's useful for learning the fundamentals, and in particular for learning racecraft. There's nothing better than karting for learning racecraft. But beyond that, once you get this suspension and aerodynamics involved, it kind of you need to get into cars.
Yeah, because I haven't done very much karting at all. I think I've probably been, in the last 10 years, I've probably been 5 times, and they've been in the last 3. But every time I go, all the sort of things that I've picked up from being told at the track, use all the track, apexes, various ways of overtaking people. On a kart, you can just for some reason, I think all the things that I quite often associate with driving a car fast don't count in a kart. For example, they're not that expensive. You bump a kart, they're okay. You bump a car, it's a bit of a problem. And you normally can be going quite a bit faster. Obviously, there's some mental karts. And I was definitely that progress level of trying to cement what you're doing and the knowledge base, I found quite easy to sort of do in a kart. And then now I'm trying to bring it back into my driving of a car. Yeah,
I mean, that's exactly right. You've got more mental capacity available in a kart. It's why I actually do my masterclass days at Bruntingthorpe. I do it in a slow road car, because if you can lower the capacity needed just for driving the car, then you can open up some attention on actually thinking about the technique of driving the car. So that's probably why you'll be a lot more conscious of what you're doing and have the ability to think about other things and how you can improve in a go-kart, as opposed to the car where you might be, within 5 or 10% of all the mental capacity that you've got at that time. But with experience and with seat time, you get more and more comfortable in a car, and then you can put your attention on actually thinking about what your inputs are doing to how the car's handling, and thinking about strategy or how the tires might be going off, or thinking about setup. So definitely as drivers, you'll go through different phases and different levels of sophistication, I guess, in your driving.
Do you find when you tell people that they're driving an MX-5 that everyone's just completely fine with that? Or do you think some people go like, well, I don't want to go and do a driver day in an MX-5. Like, I've got a Ferrari. Why can't we drive the Ferrari?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when I first started with the concept of the masterclass, I thought, well, it's going to be a hard sell in an MX-5, because the drivers that are coming to do it have raced Radicals or GT3s or whatever it may be. They're in expensive, fast racing cars. But I think the type of person who wants to come and learn some proper core technique, doesn't care what they're driving. The ego's gone, and they just want to learn as quickly as possible. So the MX-5 is a fantastic car to use for the course because it's soft. So any issues or imperfections in technique, as you know, Sam, are highlighted quite drastically. It's actually harder to drive that car than it is a racing car because it's softer and so your steering input and how you are with the accelerator and the trail braking, it's amplified the importance. And then with it being relatively slow, it means that you open up that capacity while you're driving around with the car right on the limit to actually think about, what am I doing with my inputs? What am I doing with the steering? Because you get to this point where when you're driving where it feels too fast.
Yeah.
Our brains, and it's the same for my brain, even though I've been racing for all of my life, I still come down to a hairpin, and 10 meters or 20 meters before I actually can brake, my brain's shouting at me to lift off and get on the brakes. So you have to begin to get comfortable in that mental area. And sometimes, often, with drivers, when they get into that area where their brain's shouting at them and the alarm bells are going off, they go back to an imperfect technique because then they just drive on instinct. They're not thinking about what they're actually doing. So to get a driver in that area where they're right on the limit and they can consciously think about what they're doing, it's quite a difficult challenge.
Yeah. Is a large part of what you do basically working on people's mental capacity to do the right stuff at the right time? Is that a big hurdle that for a lot of people? Yeah,
for most people. So we start the day and get the fundamentals right, get the vision in the right area, get the scanning between the apex and the exit and where you are at the time, coming back and forwards. Then we generally move on to thinking about weight transfer. A lot of people, when they go testing or on track days, they just pound around and they just sit at this limit that they have and just go around at that speed. They don't actively think about what's happening with the car. So to bring someone's attention to how the weight is moving around the car when you're going through a corner, whether the car's up in a neutral position or it's rolled over and set before you can turn it in properly, they've never actually done that. So for them to take a different perspective of what they're doing when they're driving is critically important. But then getting them to the limit and actually to manipulate the balance of the car based on the feedback that they get from it is, like you say, it's a challenge because there's a lot going on. The car's, it's not out of control, but it's right on the edge and our brains are shouting at us that it's not a natural thing to do. So to get someone in that position with the proper process so that they can confidently get the car there and not have it bite them in the backside. So we get the technique right in the corner so that when the car does slide, it slides in a friendly way. And often if a car slides in an aggressive way, it comes from an aggressive input, either with the pedals or the steering. So if you get the technique right, first of all, then you show the driver that actually when the car does slide in a friendly way with the good technique, they've got plenty of time to sort it out. They've also increased the limit of grip quite substantially, so they've got more grip as they're going through the corner.
Yeah, I remember there was one point where we were going through this at Bruntingthorpe. You set up a bunch of cones, you drive around it once, and you're like, that looks simple, and then you start going faster and faster, and it gets more complicated. But there was one corner we were just focusing on like the smallest amounts of what would be throttle movement. Like you're really honing on just that balance of whether the car was, balanced towards the front, towards the back, towards the side. And the outcomes, depending on how you did it, were drastically different. Like one, you come out like Larry as hell all over the place. And you're like, oh, that felt fast. One just feels really smooth, but like you're on it. Yeah. And then that one is the one where you're actually going 5 miles an hour faster than the one before.
Yeah.
But until you know that that's how you can go through a corner or all those sorts of things, it feels fast. Because I definitely, when I did a race in an MX-5, I felt like I was going fast. But I think what I was probably doing was massively overdriving and really lowering that limit.
Yeah, exactly. The limit isn't the limit.
Yeah.
You can always push it further. And so a lot of drivers will go around and be on a limit, self-imposed limit, basically. And the car will be sliding, but it will be sliding prematurely. So as a driver, we need to actively think about, well, how can we push this limit as far up as possible? And that's done through analysis of what the car's doing at a particular time, and then thinking about your input and how we can manipulate that to give the limited area, whether it's the front or the rear. If the rear is sliding on corner entry, you have to think about how we can change our input to give the rear a little bit more grip. So, for example, if we're coming down to a corner, we're on the brakes, we ease up off the brakes, and we turn the car in, but we're still on the brakes a little bit because we're trail braking in, and the rear slides on that initial turn in, well, you have to ask yourself the question, what's limiting me from going faster? At that point, it's the rear of the car. So what can we do with our input on the brake pedal to actually shift the weight backwards a little bit, give the rear a little bit more grip, and so go through the corner quicker? Well, in that case, you just, where you're coming up off the brakes, you'd make that pressure a little bit lighter so the front of the car comes up a little bit, transfers some of the grip to the rear of the car, and you can go through the corner quicker. And you just do that until you've actually gone too far the other way, and you get understeer, and then you bring it back.
Yeah. And then obviously loads of people go out and then blame their setup of the car. Do you find that obviously there is a perfect setup, but is it like a perfect setup for a person, or should you really be able to drive around most stuff? That wasn't really a good question.
No, I understand. I think it depends on the level of the driver at that particular time. If the driver is relatively inexperienced, then maybe a slight understeery car would be beneficial to them because it gives you a bit more confidence. They don't want to feel a limit, right?
Yeah.
And they probably don't want it to be oversteer. They probably want it to be understeer because it's a bit easier to control.
Yeah.
So that will then give them confidence to push a little bit more. And although their limit will be slightly lower because the car won't be properly balanced, at least they'll have the confidence to push on reasonably well. But a really good driver will adapt to the car and the balance of the car at that particular time. Now, the car does need to be in the ballpark in terms of setup, but it's very rare that you get in a car in a qualifying session or a race, as you know, and it's perfect. It doesn't happen that often. So there will be subtle differences in whether the car's, pushing on the way in or on the exit or whatever it is, and you'll adapt to that. So that's where the great drivers really come into play, if they can adapt to an imbalance in the setup.
Yeah, because I've definitely had it where I'm driving a car and I'm like, the tires feel rubbish, whatever, and then that loads of stuff needs to change, and then someone else, a pro, will get in it and go and set a lap like 8 seconds faster or something. You're like, okay, so we know the car might not be quite, within a tenth of perfect pace, but there's possibly something else stopping it for getting there.
That's it. I mean, as I mentioned before, you've got to analyze what's going on at each point through the corner. So the turn in, the apex, and the exit, and then think about how you can adapt your technique to suit that and get the most out of the car. If we're not using all the grip from all of the tyres all the way through the corner, then we're leaving some speed on the table.
Yeah.
And it may be that the setup that the car has, or whether the track temperature's changed, or the tyres are going off, or the wind, whatever it is, there's loads of different variables when you're driving that may affect the balance. And so you've just got to adapt to it.
So some cars are sort of historically said to be tricky to drive. Do you sort of believe, let's say an old 911, everyone's like, oh, they're really dangerous, they're going to kill you.
Right. I'm just scared about the 911.
And do you find actually most stuff, if driven properly, is not that bad, or some cars are just horrific to drive, or any standouts or anything like that?
There are differences, yeah. There are, the older stuff is more difficult. The suspension's probably not as sophisticated. If you've got the big lump of an engine in the back, then you have kind of a pendulum effect as you're coming into the corner. But that, it depends how you approach the car, and you have a kind of idea based on understanding that the engine's at the back, how you're going to drive it. But once you get a feel for it, if you approach the limit for that car in a certain way, then you can do it smoothly, and it's not going to bite you in the backside. Granted, some cars are more difficult to drive than others. I mean, if you take an early 90s F1 car, put it in Monaco in the wet, it's going to be challenging to drive. But aside from that, like normal road cars, I think they're all relatively friendly.
Yeah, I definitely, the first time I drove a rear-wheel drive car, I sort of shat myself. I was like, not as in I did anything silly. I just had this impression that I was going to get. I think the first time I drove a car that had 400 horsepower or something, it was an Aston, and I just had this apprehension that I was going to die like straight away. And then you drive stuff more and you learn that actually it's your inputs that cause any of the stuff else to happen. You don't just, unless you have a mechanical failure, you don't just fly off the track. I had, or still have, a lot of problems driving in the wet. I'm getting there. But I think it's a practice thing now, understanding the concept. But for people that haven't driven on, and I would say it's almost specifically limited to, you have to be on a track. It's not the same on the road, where there's been rubber, or there is a racing line that is smooth and then also extremely slippy. And I don't know, can you talk a little bit about that's like and how you might go around that?
That was when you were talking about the wet. That was the first thing that I was going to say was the biggest issue, because you have this invisible ribbon of low grip track that you're traveling across multiple times perhaps in a corner. So, for those who don't know, who may be listening to this, the rubber gets laid down on the line during dry running on a circuit, and then when it rains, this dry line is incredibly slippery, and you'll actively in some corners try to stay away from it. And I don't know the actual figure, but sometimes I think it can be like 15 or 20% less grip rather than running around the outside.
And what it feels like until someone's explained what is happening. The first time you're on a track and it's really wet and you approach a corner and you slam on the brakes, it's like you've just hit ice. It's not like it's wet or anything. It's just ice and you're going off.
Well, you've got rubber, water and rubber, haven't you? It's not got a great coefficient of friction. But to further complicate, if you imagine coming up to a 90-degree corner, you're braking on the normal line, so you've got 20% less grip, for example, and then if you take the normal karting or wet line around the outside, you then come off the rubber, come into the higher grip area of the circuit that doesn't have the rubber on it. But then as you exit the corner, all of a sudden, and it's over a couple of meters, the grip just disappears again. So that's where people can get caught out in the wet, because you get this massive change in grip levels throughout a corner. So it's incredibly tricky, and you can't really see it. So you have to imagine and also feel where the grip is. For example, I was at Brands Hatch on Tuesday, and it was wet all day, and some of the corners you'd drive on the dry line, and some of the corners you'd go right around the outside. And one of the difficulties with driving in the wet as well is that because you're driving around the outside a lot of the time. For example, paddock at Brands Hatch, the first corner at Brands Hatch is a quick corner, right? It's downhill, comes back up again, really tricky even in the dry. But in the wet, we ended up driving on Tuesday right around the outside of the corner. So it means that your margin for error, if you go in a mile an hour too quick, you've got no margin for error. So you're just going to drop it into the gravel there. So it makes it incredibly difficult. And with the changing grip levels as you come through the braking zone and then onto the grippier tarmac, it makes it incredibly hard. Plus falling down the hill as you're down there, it's very difficult. So driving in the rain is a massive challenge.
It's funny, and if you watch, the the F1 guys or any racing, you will see people, and karting all the same, just driving lines that you go, that just looks super weird. And the commentators always talk about it. But I'm always amazed. I've been amazed recently at how much in the wet people don't. Like people still don't drive, even offline. And then it slightly baffles my mind, because you see people having a really hard time just on the line, but they just go, I guess, until you know otherwise.
But you see it,
but it might be faster
in professional championships as well. Like we saw it in Brazil 2 years ago, was it, when Max Verstappen just drove around everyone? Yeah. Granted, he was on a slightly different strategy, but there's a couple of caveats to that. You can sometimes be on a rubber that works pretty well with the rubber that's in the track. Yeah. I don't know about the F1 Pirellis, but I've tested a few cars when it's rained, and it obviously depends on the championships that have been there in the weeks before that's actually laid the rubber into the track. But I've been in a couple of cars where actually the rubber on the cars worked pretty well on the line, so there wasn't much difference, and so then it's actually more beneficial to open up the corner slightly and drive on the normal shallow arc ideal line. But yeah, you see it, like you say, motorsport, and you could see in that race, Brazil, I think it's 2016, when they were behind the safety car, Verstappen was trying to figure out where the grip was. Different patches of circuit. He was driving around more than anybody else, and that to me was amazing. I don't know why nobody else was doing that, because they should have been giving themselves the information.
It's crazy and it literally goes all the way up. Yeah, like you said, it goes all the way up to F1, where people are not doing these things that seem obvious or like you should be doing. Like something we talked about a lot was getting information about the car, information about the tires, information about the track as soon as possible. I just chuck it down. And because I think you said you watched some of my videos. I sent you some footage of the Radical and stuff like that. And we talked about some stuff, and we worked out that it takes me, if I go to a test day, it might take me 5 laps before I'm sort of really pushing at all in the slightest. And it happens the same on race weekends. And we spent quite a long time working on methods of preparing yourself and getting on it. And I think by the end of the day, it was starting to get there where we'd sort of stop, have a little break, and then be like, right, you've got to go flat out now.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really good exercise to do. And then trying to think about all the things we've thought about and whatever.
Yeah, there's a few layers of learning there. I mean, yeah, that's true. If you don't give yourself the information, how do you know how much grip the car's got? It's very apparent when we're coaching on track that some drivers will just try to build up to a limit, but it'll take them 5 or 6 laps to actually, before they even break traction anywhere. So that puts them 6 laps behind someone who's got the information from turn 2.
Yeah.
And there's certain strategies that you can take to minimize the risk when you're on cold tires, or whether it's raining or whatever that is. And they tend to be to put the car in a position or a platform so that you create a little bit of understeer rather than oversteer. So while it's not the absolute limit because the front's breaking away before the rear, it's somewhere in the ballpark, and you get a bit of information there. So you can brake as you're coming into a corner, feel, maybe over brake, so you can feel the car or the front tires lock up slightly. It's a piece of information. You then come out of the brakes quite early, so the front comes up and the car's going to understeer. You turn the car in, maybe get on the throttle so it pushes through the corner. You've got another bit of information. And doing that straight away gives you some information about the circuit that you can then extrapolate around the other corners. And it's especially useful, when it begins to rain, or when it's raining, or it's been dry in qualifying and then you go into a wet race where you don't have a good understanding of how much grip there is. You can use these strategies to find the limit in a safe way as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and that's something that definitely separates someone like yourself, someone who drives all the time, a pro driver, who you've got tons and tons and tons of experience. And the thing I've noticed is it's not necessarily, you get sort of gentleman drivers who are very, very fast. But quite often, they're not very, very fast lap 1 or lap 2. It might take them a little bit of time to warm up. And that, from what I've sort of come across, seems to be a big differentiator between pros and people who are really on it and people who can drive fast, but it takes a while to get there.
Yeah, I think that's it's a process as you saw. It's if you minimise the risk and get the information from the track, then you're going to have more confidence to go more quickly. And it's just a process, anybody can do it if they know the right order and the right attitude to have the car in as you enter the corner. So it's only going to understeer, then you minimise that risk of having a thing snap around and you going off. And experienced drivers will be doing that naturally because they've been doing it for years. As you mentioned there, the gentleman drivers or the AM drivers will actually start off at maybe 60% pace and then gradually build over 10 laps or so until they finally reach the limit. But what the professional drivers do will actually go over that limit very quickly, but in a safe way, so that they don't have the risk of going off. So that's how they can get there so quickly.
Yeah, and that was definitely something like we talked about a lot, and that ability to push the car in a safe way.
Yeah.
Whereas I think if you've just like the first time you drive a car with cold slicks, you're just like, this is the most dangerous, crazy scenario. You just think you're just going to get fired off the track because you just have no grip. And then I remember someone was like, well, okay, get the car pointed in a straight line, like, and do a couple of burnouts, like out of the pits. Like, just light up the rears. You're only going in a straight line. Nothing's going to go wrong, really. Just don't hit a pit wall or something.
Yeah.
And then you've got some heat, at which point you're then just going to understeer rather than oversteer. I think one of the weekends I was at Brands, watching people drive out of the pits and go down Paddock Hill on cold tyres is just comical because people are going like 20 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour, and they just start sliding as they go down the hill.
Those radicals are with the compound of the tyres. They're quite an extreme example because they, like you say, when they're cold, they really don't have much grip. But going back to what you said before, yeah, there's a process and a strategy to warming the tyres. Get the rears warm first, so that they've got more grip than the fronts. Then all you're going to do is understeer. You can then build the tyres, but you've got this difference in the balance, at least at the beginning, until they all come up to temperature. But you're minimising the risk, and that's what a lot of it is about. Not because we're worried about the car going off, but because we don't want to spin, and we want to have the confidence to push it as early as possible.
Do you see much benefit in sims or I'd say from the bottom end, someone playing it on their phone or whatever, up to the top end where people have crazy like 100 grand sim setups? Have you much experience with that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a sim myself, and I use it. I use it for technique and training. It depends on the level of the sim. I think more, people say that they've got a sim and they might just have a PlayStation and a plastic steering wheel. I don't necessarily think that is a useful tool. It can be in terms of learning a track, or at least the direction of a track, not learning a track properly. Yeah. And it can be useful for some of the most fundamental techniques, like looking in the right area and those types of things, being aware of where you are on the circuit. But in terms of understanding weight transfer and trail braking properly and all of those more detailed things, you need to have a decent simulator. I use the Fanatec equipment, and I think that's probably the bottom end of it being useful. You need to have something of at least that quality to have the feel in the brakes, and even the Fanatec stuff sometimes doesn't quite have the feel that you need, because you need to have the feel for the trail braking, and when we're trail braking, the last bit of the pressure which controls the front of the car and the balance front to rear is very, very light, very delicate. And so if you don't have a pressure sensor in the brake pedal and it isn't weighted properly, it's very difficult to do that.
Yeah, you see You definitely see people driving crazy fast on sims with controllers and just, any sim setup. But I think, like, I've just got Thrustmaster set up over there, and you can definitely do, the weight transfer and all that sort of stuff is there.
Yeah.
But it is just very, like, braking, for example, is basically impossible to do.
Yeah.
Like with ABS off, you'd have to spend a silly amount of time learning it rather than being able to feel it in any way, shape, or form.
I think you have to learn if looking at has that got a pressure sensor in it?
It's just got no.
So you have to learn the position of where the brakes are working, and then you can't feel it. You can't feel the pressure. So it's more difficult to learn the linear position, I guess, than the actual pressure that you're putting through it. Especially when you're coming back out and trail braking, to learn that you've got to bring it back up to 20 mil or something like that is very, very difficult.
I do have you can get a little cone mod. So it does get harder as you go. Yeah. But it's not like, it's just, when you watch people who are fast, obviously, it's got to be super smooth. And it's, when you're driving a car, like when we're in the MX-5 and you're trail braking, you've got all the sensory stuff to tell you that whether you're, quite on the limit, and then you can adjust it accordingly. Definitely with this sort of setup, you can't do that because it's...
No, and it's, well, it like I say, it's the equipment. As you get into a more a high quality sim or more expensive sim, you get a bit more information. You get the weight through the steering wheel, you get the feeling through the brakes. But with all sim racing, you're not getting as much information as you are from a real car. Yeah. So actually, it's quite difficult to be quick in a sim. It's incredible though. I met a young guy called Brendan Lee, who is the F1 esports world champion, drives for Mercedes. Met him last year. And in speaking to him, in things like about setup and how the cars feel, I couldn't tell if it was an e-racer or a sim racer or a real life racer. Like the way that he described the feeling and setup changes in particular were exactly the same. Right. It was incredible. Yeah, we had a race on one of Simon Mason's sims that he creates for gentleman drivers, and it was really interesting to see that the processes that he was going through were exactly the same as it is in the real world. And I know from when I go on sims, my learning process is exactly the same. And the speed at which I do it is exactly the same as the real world. So they are really useful for that. If you get the right software, I think Assetto Corsa is probably the best in terms of feel, in terms of actually driving the car. The process that I go through in terms of making it understeer initially and to find a limit and then build into that, and with the trail braking and even playing around with the setup, the car setup in that software was exactly the same process. And you can obviously use them as much as you want and have lots of seat time. So they are a valuable tool. Yeah, definitely. I remember I went and did a day at Silverstone. I was driving a Radical. I was talking to the people there, and we were talking about setup. And then I came home and played with, I can't remember what it was, Project Cars or something, with a Radical at Silverstone, and then started playing with the setup in the game, and you feel the changes straight away. Yeah. And I suddenly was like, oh, this is a really good way of learning about setup, because you can just mess with it at the press of a button and see how it's different. Now, you may not understand why it's different, and it's normally, it all comes down to that weight transfer and stuff like that, and how that works. But I thought, anyway, it was very interesting. It is. I don't know about Project Cars in particular. I've not spent too much time on there, but for sure you can use the software to begin to understand setup. And the benefit over real racing is that the conditions are consistent. We might go out and hourly, the circuit's changing. You know yourself that a lap time can go off throughout the day, and so you've got different track temps and wind and whatever it may be. But in the sim, especially when you're trying to feel a setup change, the conditions are consistent. So in some parts, it's actually better. Yeah, I remember early on, it was the first time I looked at data, and I sort of was like, okay, how fast is an SR3 around Silverstone? Like,
Oomph, I want to know. And then whoever I was with was like, well, we've got some data of a fast SR3, but it's not today. It's not on the same tyres. Wind might be blowing a different direction. And you're like, what do you mean? Like, surely it's the same, right? No. And then obviously there's all these factors that factor into one day in the year that might be,
might be the
a corner
day.
might be flat.
Yeah.
Or it might not be flat.
Exactly. Cops at Silverstone in a radical can be flat if the wind's coming coming towards you, but if the wind's behind you, there's no way that it's flat.
Yeah.
Also depends on the previous tests, the previous race weekends, what rubbers into the track, whether there's any fuel on the track, whatever it may be. There's so much going on that it's very difficult to compare different days directly.
Yeah, let's take that corner for example. Cops at Silverstone is a blind. You can't see the apex, you can't see around it at all.
Yeah.
Very fast corner. And like you're saying, some days it's flat. Not many days it's flat in an SR3, but some days it's not. And obviously you sort of go through the process when you're on the day of working out whether it is or isn't. But then I definitely have had early on where someone goes, okay, well, I can go through that corner 20 miles an hour faster than you can. And you're like, okay, does that mean I can just go 20 miles an hour faster and it'll be okay?
That's what, that's one of the issues with coaching at the track and not working on your core technique. And coaching at the circuits does definitely have its place. But if you just look at a speed trace on the data, that's only half the information. We're not looking at the platform of the car and the balance of the car. Essentially, you can't just copy and paste it. And you could be going. For example, if Cops was a little lift on a particular day because the wind was behind you, where are you doing that lift? Are you supporting the rear as you're going in, or are you still decelerating as you turn the car into the corner? If you're decelerating and the weight's on the front of the car, then it might be that the car oversteers when you turn it in. And so your brain instinctively says, that's it. Yeah. I'm not going any faster than that. I'm already decelerating and the thing's on the limit. So that's it. We're done. And that's one of the issues that drivers have, because they just get stuck in this kind of false feedback where they don't think that it's possible to go quicker. Well, if you ask yourself the question, which end of the car is limiting me, the rear in that particular case, what can I do with my inputs to readdress this imbalance, and actually made the lift either a little bit softer or got back on the accelerator so we sit the rear of the car down a little, then it will redistribute that grip to the rear of the car, and actually you could go through there half a mile an hour or 1 mile an hour quicker.
I definitely find it super interesting watching. Yes, you can see a data trace and you can be like, oh my God, that person's so much faster through there or whatever. But watching an in-car footage of the steering wheel with inputs in it, you get so much more of an idea, one, of like exactly where they're placed on the track. And then as time's gone on, I've definitely got better at looking at that stuff. The first time you watch someone in car, you're just like, oh, wow, they're fast. And then over time, I've started looking at smaller and smaller and smaller things, whether it's like specific parts of their hand inputs or where the left tire is, or, attitude of car. But it's like an endless can of worms.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, isn't there? I mean, if you're going to analyze someone's driving style, you need to see the steering wheel, you need to see where the car's positioned, and ideally you want to see the pedals. You need to see what they're doing on the pedals, because you could be looking at someone and they could be really harsh with the pedals, whether it's the brake or coming out of the throttle, and causing this lower limit of grip and making the car oversteer or understeer. So just looking at the video still isn't the full story. You've got to look at everything, because it's such a complex situation.
Do you have so you deal with people from full ends of the spectrum, I guess, of driver ability? Do you get some like serious novices up to obviously very fast people?
I've had a few people who have only done a few track days, and then to the top end where they're winning races and championships.
Obviously, there's certain processes of getting from one end to the other, but if someone were to actively, put a lot of time and the right stuff, how long do you think it should take someone
That's a
to
difficult
get
one.
moderately quick? I mean, not to get very, very fast, obviously.
Well, it depends on seat time. I mean, motorsport's a strange case, isn't it? Because it's not like we can go and get a golf lesson every 3 times a week.
Yeah.
You know, at the most, people are probably doing a day a week if they put a lot of time.
And that's a lot. Yeah.
It's a lot of time and a lot of expense. So that varies wildly, doesn't it? Because some people are only on track 10 or 15 times a year. Other people are on track 40 or 50 times a year. So that makes a big difference. Richard, my partner, Driver 61, is a good example because he started from fresh. I think he'd done a couple of track days.
Yeah.
And I first met him at Brands Hatch when I'd won the Radical Championship. He'd done a couple of I'm sure he won't mind me saying this. He'd done a couple of track days and whatever he'd done before and gone almost straight into the Radical SR1 Championship.
Okay, yeah.
And I met him looking quite sheepish out the back of the garages, and he'd just discovered that racing was a different world to track days. So ignoring the couple of days that he'd done before I met him, we started afresh. And that's where the inspiration for my masterclass came from, is that we went to Blyton Park in near Gainsborough, which is a small private track.
Yeah.
And we went there for 3 days in his Porsche in a road car. And I said to him, get a road car, nice and soft, and we'll just work on the fundamental techniques, get your vision right. We spent half a day just working on his vision, like half a day. Look here, scan between, just getting him out of that natural urge to look close to the car and not have a broad view of the circuit. Did that, then began to understand the weight transfer, started to get a bit quicker, and by the end of those few days, he was significantly better. And doing it in a road car, obviously, you learn a lot quicker than you would do in an SR1 Radical because it's too fast almost. So then he went from that to being, he's quick now. He'll get within half a second or a second of me on most test days in a Radical, which is in itself is quite a tricky car to drive. And he did that over 2 years, just over 2 years, and did a reasonable amount of testing. So I think that's about as quickly as you can do it.
If you said a reasonable amount of testing, what, like 20 days?
Yeah, I'd say 20, 25 days. Yeah. And effective testing as well, because there's no point in taking a Radical on a track day where you're going to be tripping over people all the time. One of the advantages of doing the masterclass at Bruntingthorpe is that there's no other traffic there. So the repetition and the flow that a client gets into is massive. The effective time that you spend there on the limit or around the limit, actually learning what the car's doing, is substantially more than you would get on a test or a track day, because you're just interrupted all the time. So there's that, but then there's also that, picking the right day to go and test on. And if you can go and do a quieter day, either at the start or the end of the year, or a semi-exclusive day, then even though they're more expensive, it's probably worth your while, because you're going to spend a lot more quality time in that day learning in the right area.
I think that was something that was great when we were at Bruntingthorpe, is because we're both sitting in the car and you're driving around and there isn't really anyone else around, you can just an issue comes up and you can just stop basically and talk about it and then crack on. Whereas if you're at a test day or something like that, generally you go out and you do like a 20-minute session and then you come back in and then you talk about it for 15 minutes and then you go back out again. Whereas rather than just get that immediate, obviously you can have someone in the car, but you can't talk to each other in the car.
Not particularly well.
You can sort of wave and punch.
But it isn't like slowing down and saying, okay, Sam, have a think about this technique and then go and try and do this. And going back to what we were saying about how quickly you can do it. Say, for example, Richard did 50 or 60 days over those 2 years, and now he's half a second or a second off me on a typical track. That puts him within a percent of what I can do. So to get an amateur driver to be within a percent of someone who's been doing it all of their life over only 50 days of practice is incredible. I find that with racing, that it's amazing that people can get up to and somewhere close to the speed of a professional over a very short period. You compare that to tennis or something. If you if you did 50 days of practice of tennis and then went and played a world champion, there's no way that you'd be within 1% of him.
Yeah, it's crazy that, isn't it? Like the ability of how quickly you can progress. I think when I started, I had this belief that there were just some people that were better drivers than others. And then after doing not much training and not many test days, I'd got significantly better. And you suddenly go, hang on, these guys are like fast, but they're not like...
I can see it.
I could see how you could get there. And I haven't done that much testing. I think I did 2 seasons of SR1, and I did the testing. I did the sort of the Friday testings for that. So I don't know, 20 days or something over 2 years. And then I've done a bit since then. So probably another 5 days. But the amount you progress, if you do it properly, you can progress so much in just like an hour. Or they're almost just doing seat time is great. And I think definitely for my wet confidence, I know what I need to do. I just need to be more comfortable in that uncomfortable environment, and you'll get faster. But I can't remember what I was going to say. It's going down some route
about the amount of time that you'd spent in the car. You'd only done 25 days.
Yeah,
or so, and the leaps forwards that we can make.
Yeah, the leaps forwards are massive. And I remember coming across some people at the beginning. So there was one guy who came in and he was just way faster than everyone else, like way faster. And then I spoke to someone and they said, "Oh yeah, but he went and did something ridiculous like 40 test days before the season started." And you go, okay, well, I've done 2. So, yeah, I get that. Yeah. I'm not going to try. You're not going to suddenly wake up one day and be 8 seconds a lap faster. But if you do the right things, there's definitely click moments.
Yeah.
Where I've had where I've something suddenly clicked and I've been 3 seconds faster.
Yeah.
Or that sort of stuff.
If you get the fundamental technique right in one corner, then you get it right in every corner. And so 0.2 of a second if it's not much to gain 0.2 of a second. You do that in every corner, it's 2-3 seconds.
Yeah.
So it obviously makes a massive difference. So they're the moments when the things click and drivers will race up to probably being 2 or 3 seconds off the pace. And then it requires the finesse and a bit more experience to really, those last 2 or 3 seconds are where we move the limit from being down here and move it up based on the inputs that you're putting into the car and based on understanding and beginning to understand the setup of the car. Yeah,
because when you drive past someone who's going even, let's say they're going 5 seconds a lap slower than you, that feels like they're basically going backwards.
Yeah.
Which is crazy because they're not going slowly and they feel like they're on the limit. And obviously I know there's people will come past me like this at times where you're just like, what is this guy doing? Like, you're like, you're on the limit, you're sliding, and they're just driving past you. Like, what?
That's because the limit isn't necessarily the limit.
The limit is not the limit.
With the spiky, with the spiky input, you get a lower limit, and that's why you can feel like you're driving around as fast as it will go, and actually you're not.
So you have done a bunch of coaching for a long period of time. Have you worked for some manufacturers in that regard and stuff like that?
Yeah, I've coached for quite a few of them. When I was younger, I worked with Ferrari with their track day and racing club. Worked a couple of times for McLaren.
Yeah. Do you still do that or
no? Not
so much.
No, I just focus now. So I'm doing the Masterclass and I'm looking at some other products that we can put through the website. The website itself takes up a lot of time. I'm trying to refocus this year on doing more videos for drivers, another university series on setup. So I'm doing that in association with somebody else, and trying to. I've seen that the information out there for setup is either not very good or just complete hardcore physics.
Yeah.
And so I want to give drivers something that they can actually use. So explaining that from a driving perspective, but also what it's doing mechanically, and merging the two things together to put together it'll be free again, a free course to begin to understand setup, and then actually how we go about making those changes. So what the dampers do, what the springs do, what the roll bar does, and actually from the beginning, how to know when we should begin to make setup changes. Because if you're not,
that's super important.
If you're not aware of what's happening with the car, then you definitely shouldn't be changing the setup, because you'll just end up going down the wrong route and make the car worse.
Because I've definitely had that. I come in and the mechanics go, okay, so what do you guys want us to change in the car? And I'm like, no, I'm not. Like, I'm not there yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I'm there to that point, then we'll change something. They're like, but you're getting understeer. I'm like, I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm not.
That's a capacity thing that, like we mentioned before, if you're just driving the car, and it takes a lot of capacity to drive a quick car like a Radical. You can't process the information and then retain the information about what the car's doing in a slow speed corner, a high speed corner, a medium speed corner, and then throughout the corner, in the different phases of the corner, then you're better off, you made the right decision not making a setup change. The step into that is quite difficult. So you can prepare yourself, because if you start to make notes on the individual areas of the corner, what you think the car's doing, and then go and look at your data in your video and try and confirm what you believe to have happened is actually the truth, then you start to actively think about it when you're on the track and retain that information, and then you can come in and actually be secure in the fact that the feedback that you have from the car is correct.
Yeah, definitely. And it is, I think, like you're saying, quite a lot. I've bought a couple of books on setup, and you start them, and then you're in this weird rabbit hole of like serious like engineering type stuff.
Yeah.
And like, okay. Like I understand if you're building suspension for a race car, you want to know about where all these like polar moments of inertia and whatever, and how it all works out and stuff like that. But I just want to know, okay, if the car does this, what should I do?
Yeah.
Or, like a basic guide to, like, there's a really good photography book that's like, you want it to do this.
This is what you do.
Do this.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's what I'm aiming to do.
Oh, cool.
Because there's a big hole there. No one's got that information, and people are very interested in learning how to set a car up properly, and it's massively beneficial. Although you can drive around a lot of the problems, I'm still making setup changes throughout a weekend to make my job easier, to make it easier for me to be consistent all through a race and as the tyres go off and so on.
Yeah, like if you've got a car that chronically understeers, like it's the right pain in the ass.
Yeah, and with understeer, it's difficult, because if you think about it, you can adapt on the corner entry, maybe trail braking a little bit more to keep the weight on the nose. But once you've made the transition to getting on the throttle, there's nothing really you can do. The rear of the car sat down.
Yeah.
So how are you going to get more grip to the front of the car? You've just got to be patient. And so in that circumstance, giving the front a little bit more grip will be massively beneficial to your time.
I think I have had a sort of allergic reaction to understeer in my driving experience. And so much so that my cars are always set up way too oversteering. But I quite like it because it's kind of fun. But definitely had it to the point a lot where I've always had problems with brake bias for some reason. Like, I turn it to the front, it's not at the front. But various cars, like my SR1, we definitely had issue. It was a car issue, not a thing. But that, every time I pressed the brakes, it was like ripping a handbrake. It's like doing some sort of Formula Drift series in the SR1. But a lot of fun. So you've raced a bunch of cars, lots of different stuff. Is it like full spectrum? Have you gone, have you raced a bunch of old stuff? You've definitely driven a bunch of old Formula One cars. What's sort of the most interesting or biggest spread of stuff you've driven? Have you basically just driven a lot of stuff?
Yeah. Well, on Tuesday, I was driving an MX-5 at Brands Hatch.
Yeah.
So just going back to Richard again. So he got quick in the radical, and but his race starts and his racecraft aren't as good as it could be. And in the radical championship, you know, the overtaking is difficult because you got aero, so you get less grip when you're following somebody, and then the overtaking manoeuvre is very, very short. So he's actually driving an MX-5 this year, so he can learn some wheel-to-wheel racing, which is fantastic. So anyway, I was in the MX-5 on Tuesday, and then today I've been in a 98 Benetton, just doing a shakedown test. But so a big spectrum between the cars. I've raced historic cars, I've raced modern cars, GT cars, single-seaters, prototype cars. I've been very fortunate to be around motorsport for a long time.
That's pretty cool. If in a sort of, if you had to condense it down to sort of one thing, what's the most fun you've had like racing? Or is there like a certain car that you go, that's the most fun? Or is there something that you said a part of racing certain cars or certain types or certain scenarios that you enjoy the most?
Yeah, honestly, the car doesn't make that much difference. I like having a race, a proper race with some good drivers. The wheel-to-wheel racing, and that doesn't matter what it's in. And actually, generally in the slower stuff, you get better racing. You know, I did the Formula Ford Classic Formula Ford Festival in last October. My dad has a classic Formula Ford car as well, so I used his other car, and we both went racing, and awesome. That was a lot of fun. You know, I'm like karting again. I'm at the track with my old man. Yeah. And but the racing there was just fantastic. Like a couple of young guys doing it. I'm 33, so I'm not the oldest driver on the grid, but a couple of young upcoming drivers are doing it. There's an older fella in there as well who raced with Senna in Formula Ford, beat Senna in Formula 4, so he's still quick. So there were a bunch of us up there, 4 or 5 cars, nose to tail, racing in the wet around Brands. And it's just, you know, it's just when you're nose to tail like that and you're thinking about the strategy as you go through the race, it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So for me, it's more having a race. You know, those Formula 4 cars aren't quick at all, but it's the racing, the wheel-to-wheel racing and beating somebody, setting them up for an overtaking manoeuvre at the right time of the race so that they can't get you back before the line.
Yeah, I think if I had to say the most fun I've had racing, that driving the Radicals has been great. It's been really fast. But the C1 24-hour race I did at Spa recently, like mega battles. And there's different classes of car. And there's, like any track day, if you're in a slow car and you overtake a fast car, it's like the best thing ever. But if you're doing that with like 3 people mobbing and you go in front and they go in front, that was so much fun. And I think Richard had a bit of the same thing of like, you want to go racing, like and a significant part of the SR3s is it's just so expensive, and because of that, and it's not tons of cars, it's not masses, and the aero and things, people don't get. It's not really intense racing. Whereas as soon as the budgets go down for now, whoever you may be, an SR3 may be that budget, a GT3 car may be that budget, but you want to not be worrying about the car price or damaging something as being an issue. I think
absolutely. I think if you're having to think about damaging the car, then it puts you in a very difficult position, doesn't it? I mean, I don't know if naturally I don't think about that, and I think if I did think about that, I wouldn't be racing. Because you know we're driving around and we want to be racing properly. I think going back to what you said before about the Radicals and the quicker cars, driving a car like that, whether it's a Radical or a LMP3 car or an F1 car, a classic F1 car, part of the fun is driving a quick car quickly, you know. But once you've done that, if the racing isn't very good, you might as well be on a test day. Yeah. Right. So once the enjoyment of actually just driving the thing on the limit, which is fantastic, don't get me wrong, it's a massive challenge in a quick car. But then add to that the proper racing, which you tend to get in the non-aero and actually cheaper series because the grids tend to be bigger. Yeah. That's just a hoot, isn't it? When you're laughing when you're going round and just trying to tee somebody up for an overtake maneuver. Like I've raced at Spa as well in the Fun Cup 25-hour race. Yeah. much like the C1 championship, it's like the cars aren't particularly quick, but you get grids of 100 cars.
Yeah.
And like, how is that not fun? It's like indoor karting on a stag party, isn't it? But at a spa in the nighttime. So it's just fantastic. And so the real enjoyment, once you've got over the, maybe I'd be in a different position if I hadn't been lucky enough to drive all these fast cars. But for me, it's just the racing.
Yeah. Something that definitely seems to happen with is, you were saying you don't necessarily think about the value of the car. Does that change if you're driving? Like, let's say you were driving, someone hands me the keys and they don't care about it, and they're like, drive that as fast as possible. That's one thing. And then there's, you're paying for it. It's your car. It's very different, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It is actually, because I got asked to race. Well, I had so much fun in Richard's MX-5 that I thought, I might just do a race. It'd be a laugh, and to be in there with Rich, and we could do a bit in testing and start to get him used to the racecraft. Someone said, "Oh, you can come and drive this car." It was reasonably cheap. Yeah, but I've not. It sounds bad, but I've been lucky enough not to have to pay for racing ever, really. Full stop. So I was going to have to pay for this, and it wasn't really the cost of the weekend, but it was the cost of if I got fired off or went off. But if I got fired off and wrote the car off, then that would obviously
fall on you.
Be full on me. And when you're not racing with someone, that just falls solely on me. And so I'm not doing it, because I would actually be thinking about the cost of the car, as we mentioned before, and I'd prefer not to race because if I'm going to go racing, I wouldn't be able to do it. I wouldn't be able to back out of something because I'd be thinking about the car. I'd get too involved. so I'm not doing it. We I'll do something later in the year, but I thought I should just be a bit careful.
That was the first, like, driving the C1, for example. We had 5 people. We agreed to split all the costs in the car. So our max liability was like a couple of £100 each or something.
Right.
If we just, it was probably a bit more, maybe like 500 quid if we like totaled the car. And that, obviously you're in a 24-hour race, you want to finish. But that's the only regard I had for this car in any way, shape or form. Was like, I don't want to damage it because I want to finish. And if I damage it, that'll be a right pain in the ass. But other than that, like, I'm going for all these things that you just take that out of the equation.
And did that affect you when you were in the Radical? Were you thinking about that?
It does affect me in the Radical.
Yeah, that's it. Obviously, I don't know. I think that from my perspective, that makes it quite difficult, doesn't it? I'd prefer to go and race something that you don't have to worry about and can race hard and properly than having to back out of something or drive. Like, it will affect you subconsciously, won't it?
I think it's
thinking about it.
I'm not. If I'm in the Radical, I'm not so, like, it doesn't. Once I'm sort of get going, I think I sort of forget about it. But obviously, you don't want to crash, but that's also, I don't want to hit anything solid after going very fast. It might hurt. One of the things I worry about in the Radicals is some of the other cars. Who are just loose. Some people just take people out, and then they don't really care about it, and they've just written off your expensive car, and they're like, "Oh, sorry, mate."
It's a bit of an issue, isn't it, in club racing? Well, in all motorsport, because there's varying levels of how important the car is, to the driver. So it's obviously a difficult thing to manage. And when you're looking at the championships, you just hope that the officials take the right route with that. Yeah,
I would say most of the drivers I've come across are like super nice, care about each other. They don't want to smash their car up. They definitely don't want to smash your car up. Like, I can accept that if I make a mistake and I write off my car, that's on me. If I write off someone else's car, that's like, well, I mean, I'm not paying for it, but I feel really, really bad. I'd feel way worse damaging a wing on someone's car than I would like crunching the front on my car.
Yeah, of course, because they're just an innocent bystander, really. If you drive into them, for example, obviously it gets a bit grey in some areas when it's a racing incident or it's both people's fault and one of them comes off worse. It's a difficult situation, but you're always going to have that.
Yeah, it's now I'm quite like a sort of engineering-y, physics-y type person, and when I learn about stuff, I want to talk about the physics, or not necessarily, I don't want numbers or whatever, but you can just explain this is what the tire's doing, and this is why that's that, and I'm good with that. Do you come across different people that learn differently, or like younger people and older people, or men and women, or that people need different styles? Do you have to adapt to that quite a lot?
I wouldn't say so. I think if you give it enough information, like you've just explained, this is what the suspension's doing and this is why it's doing it, for example, then that's enough. You don't need to go into the deep physics of it. You just need to explain mechanically what's going on, because then they can feel it and they can adapt to that. The difference in people is how they behave when they feel like the car's out of control.
Right.
Or just bringing them up into that area gently. So basically, when they get a shot of adrenaline, or when the red mist comes down, some people find it quite hard to become comfortable in that area. So that's where you might have to coach somebody in a slightly different way.
Yeah. Do you do? I know something that was massively beneficial for me was doing some drifting, or going to somewhere where you can just put your foot down until the car spins out. Like it does. That sort of thing. Do you try and get people to do that early? Is that something you would try to get people to do early on, or do you sort of wait until, or is it obviously it's tailored to the individual? I
think that's useful for if you've never experienced oversteer before, for example, and beginning to understand how to control that. I do think that controlling oversteer is quite a natural thing for us to correct and counter steer. But there's a point where actually it's a negative, because what you might learn on some of those days is that, or some of those training days, is to make the car slide and bring the limit down as far as you can. So when you're drifting, you're actually trying to make the car slide at the slowest speed possible. Yeah. When we're on track, we're trying to do the opposite of that. So for that reason, you'll be hard on the accelerator, trying to disrupt the rear. You'll flick the car into the corner on the brakes to get the car to rotate or oversteer as early as possible. So it is beneficial to, if you're not used to the car sliding, but then actually the things that you have to do to get it there aren't beneficial for driving on track.
Yeah, yeah. And it is, at the end of it, it's all weight management and tyres and stuff that you either drift or you don't drift. But
yeah, if you can be conscious enough to understand why the thing's drifting, whether you're getting the weight on the nose and then turning the car, then and actively then change when you get on track, then that's fine. But if you're developing some kind of muscle memory based on the drifting and the car control, then it's a massive negative, because you'll start turning the car in hard and maybe lifting off the accelerator too hard or whatever it may be. So yeah, you treat it with caution really when you do those types of things.
Something I found very difficult was, and it was, I think it could have just been any car, but fast cornering and then cars starting to slide. Like building up to that point where you're comfortable going over that limit, and then there was a big aha moment. It was, let's say in the Radical, I think I can't remember where I was, maybe Beckett's or something like that. Or there was that fast right-hander after the international pits.
Turn 1, Farm. Is it Farm or Abbey?
Is it Abbey?
Farm? Abbey or Farm?
I think it's Abbey Farm.
Turn 1 and turn 2.
So in an SR3, you're like flat in fifth or something.
Yeah.
And you just turn in. And then the car started to slide. And it caught it, and like it was a little bit of an adjustment. You're like, oh, I'm okay, cool. Like sliding at whatever 120 with loads of aero, it's very similar to sliding at 30 with not much aero in the basic concepts of how the car moves. It doesn't. I had this vision, and I think some cars may, depending on tires, whatever, where the car just suddenly like explodes and off you go into a wall. Like,
well, it all depends how you approach it, doesn't it? The slide is a mirror image of the input that you put into it. So if you've got bad technique, if you've got poor technique, and you're turning the thing in hard and maybe lifting at the same time, then if you do those inputs over a short piece of tarmac, then the slide is going to be equally over a short piece of tarmac, and it's going to be snappy. Whereas if you blend everything in really smoothly, the slide will be progressive. That's just how it is. And so if you get the core technique right from the beginning actually when you then reach a limit, whether it's a slow corner or a fast corner, it's going to do it in a smooth way. The added complication at a corner like turn 1 is that you're probably crossing over the direction of wind there. So all of a sudden you've got a change in the amount of grip that you've got. Definitely at Copse, the way that the wind comes across at Silverstone, you're going from probably having a headwind and then into a crosswind. So you get a very quick decrease in grip. And so that's why it can be difficult, because you're turning in and you've got one sensation and then all of a sudden you get a slightly different balance in the car.
Yeah, and it's building up to that, like training high speed stuff. Is that something that people tend to struggle with, or some people get it straight away?
No, it's more difficult when you're going quickly, for sure, because you're going quicker, you're using more capacity, the alarm bells are going off, but you can do things in a certain intelligent way. For example, testing at Silverstone National, if you want to get used to a quick corner. The national circuit's only, is it 1.2 miles, maybe 1.3 miles long. So you get massive repetition. Copse is a great corner because it's almost flat out in a lot of cars. It's a quick corner. And you've got loads of runoff on the outside. So it means that you can put yourself in a position where you're learning about a quick corner, but with a decent safety margin. Plus you get massive repetition because it's a short lap. And so you can learn very quickly. It goes back to what we were saying about learning in the most efficient way possible.
Yeah, I've definitely been off like deep down there, but being completely, you run like a couple of car lengths off the side and you're fine. Like it's okay. But when you're going in, sometimes you're like, okay.
And I mean, it's the same for me. It's great that the runoff's there from a safety perspective, but it completely changes the way that you approach a new day or a new car at that circuit, because it used to be when there was grass and gravel there that you would have to approach it probably over 5 or 10 laps to build up to the speed. Now, lap 2, you're probably going to go wide and then you rein it in a little bit. And it means that you find the limit in just a handful of laps rather than 10 laps. So it makes the differences in skill level less apparent, because everyone can do it a lot. My advice now when we go coaching, and I don't like myself for it, but my advice is go in there a little bit quicker than you expect and run wide and then bring it back, because it's a more efficient way to find the limit through a quick corner. Yeah,
it's an interesting one, that one. Do you have, if you could give the audience a couple of things like to improve their driving, like right now in like a little 3 phrases or whatever, do you have certain things that maybe you would say everyone can benefit from pretty much?
Yeah, definitely.
And then like a quick
vision is the most important thing. If you're making the transition from road driving to track driving, or even if you've got experience on track already, most people aren't looking far enough ahead. So you need to be looking, when you're on the brakes, for example, you need to be looking down at the apex, because that's where you're going to be. Just before you get to the apex, you need to be looking at the exit. You need to give yourself that information. If you're only looking 15 meters in front of the car, you'll run out of road really quickly, and you won't be able to. Or you're looking at the clock. Then you're not going to be able to make the right decisions. But then, as I've discovered more and more from the masterclass days, which I'm learning a lot from actually, because the car is the same, the track's the same. It's only the driver that's the variable. So it means that rather than going to coach a track with a different driver and a different car, there's only one variable. One thing that I found is that drivers who have a reasonable amount of experience and have been racing for a while know that they should be looking a long way ahead, and actually put too much attention on looking so far ahead that they don't scan back and filling the information about where the position of the car is and their route to where they're looking. So first thing is to look ahead at the next point. So look at the apex when you're on the brakes, look at the exit just before you get to the apex. But you've still got to scan back and forth to understand the position of the car at that particular time. So there's a lot of scanning going on. That's the biggest piece of advice. And that's where people will make the biggest step forwards, because you're giving yourself a lot more information.
Yeah. And I definitely think driving, like doing this sort of day in the MX-5, as you're saying, all the limits are lower, your speeds are lower, you have that mental capacity. And I think, would you say the thing that goes, let's say you're looking plenty ahead, but then stuff starts to get tricky or you start going faster. Is that one of the first things that goes when people's mental capacity goes down?
Yeah, exactly.
You start looking at your hands rather than down there.
I think their capacity is the same. They just use more of it. And it's a natural reaction, when we feel threatened or attacked. We get tunnel vision, we get focused. And so it's at the moment when you actually need to take a broad and long vision of where you're heading in the car, we bring our vision down and close to the car, which is obviously the wrong thing to do. And it happens to me sometimes. It's an instinctive thing to do when you feel like you're going too fast. If I'm at a new circuit or in a car, a quick, an F1 car that I haven't been in for 6 months or so, my vision, I can feel it come down and close to the car, and I have to consciously move it further forwards so I'm getting the information from the track.
Yeah. That happens in so many different things as well. Like if you, I don't know, you ski or mountain bike or anything like that, you look at the tree, you hit the tree.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then you know about it, don't you? So on that day you were sitting left seat or right seat if you're in America. Does that freak you out much, or do you try and avoid it generally? Do you end up having to do much passengering coaching with random people? Is that possibly why you... Well, I mean, I get new clients coming to do the masterclass quite often. I've spent my whole life in the passenger seat. This year, I worked it out the other day, I'm going to do over 25,000 miles in the passenger seat just this year. Yeah. I'm doing...
On track.
On track, yeah, at speed. Well, like the day that we did. And from that, you get a lot of experience. So I know halfway around the first lap where I need to be with the driver. When they come to see me at Bruntingthorpe, I show them the circuit and then get them in the driver's seat for 4 or 5 laps. And when a driver's learning a new track and a new car, no matter how slow it is, they're driving more on instinct because they're using more of their capacity. Yeah. And so their default their technique at that point rises to the surface really quickly. So straight away, I know whether I need to slow them down or not. Now, it rarely happens actually, because the people who come to do the masterclass with me want to learn. They've watched the tutorials on the website. They're perfect clients, really. It's like a great filter that they come through those tutorials because it shows that they're interested and they want to learn. So already I'm starting with a good group of drivers. But the way that I structure the day is working on, taking a couple of sessions to work on the core technique, even if they're really experienced, because a lot of really fast drivers, because they know the circuits so well and they know the cars so well, they can actually bring some of the fundamental techniques like vision. They change that because they know the tracks so well. So even with those guys, we have to go through these really simple techniques to just get them sorted. But yeah, once we've got that the fundamental techniques sorted, then reaching the limit because we're doing it in the right way is a breeze. So I can happily sit next to everybody, have the car sliding around, even in the quick corners, getting them to think about their technique, and it's completely fine.
You don't just suddenly go, I'm going to die.
No, there was this one guy called Sam actually where I thought that, but that was the only occasion.
Scott tried to pull the handbrake on me.
Yeah, so that's a little trick. If we're running out of road and we're understeering, I just pull the handbrake on and turn it a little bit. Well, I've done many miles there already this year, and we've only had one spin. Yeah. Not with you, it was with somebody else, but only had one spin because the way that we approach it is the right way. I don't want to, it has a compound effect. You need to give the driver the proper technique, which then means that the feedback that they get from the car is secure, which then breeds confidence, which means that they can then get closer and closer to the limit all the time through the corner. So there's a definite way to do that where it minimizes the risk, and it's not because I'm trying to protect myself in a safe way. It's because it's the best way to get up to speed.
Yeah. I remember early on, I remember, people say like, "Oh, if you don't crash, you're not trying," which is, I think, is an awful phrase.
That's a terrible expression.
If you're driving cars, because you meet people, and there's a couple of people I could say who've been in various series, SR3 and whatever, and they come back at the end of the season and they've binned like written off like 4 cars, and you sort of go like, dude, like, what? What are you doing? Like, it's clear, they go out and then they fly off the track and they suddenly come back in and they're like, I don't know. And it seems to be like a big learning point for me was you can just nudge up to that limit.
Yeah.
And you can nudge over that limit.
Exactly.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Like, you don't just, all that happens is you run a foot wide, not 50 foot wide. Maybe in the wet, that might happen, but...
That's just because you're becoming more refined with it. I mean, there are different varying levels of mistakes. If we go into a corner 2 miles an hour too quickly, we're just going to miss the apex by a few meters.
Yeah.
But if we, take a massive chunk out of it, then we could go off and go in the barrier. So I think those types of drivers that might crash a lot, they force the issue to happen. They'll be driving around on the limit, on their limit, and then try to force the speed to come.
Yeah.
Not taking a step back, getting the technique right, and then building into that. They just try to kind of manhandle the limit and force
someone
it to
else
happen.
went through their flat. It feels sketchy me going around in like a gear below, but I'm just going to try it flat.
Exactly. And the platform of the car is in a completely different attitude. And so they haven't got the grip available because they'll be limited severely by either end of the car. And that's when they make the big mistakes and they end up going in the wall.
So good fun. So you've started putting stuff on YouTube, and this is where this part of the Masterclass bit started from. Did you find it tricky getting on camera?
Yeah, in the beginning it was difficult. I started, I'm not a natural by any means, and I started with a script initially, and got an auto cue and tried these different things, and it looked so wooden and so bad that in the end I've settled on I make bullet points and just to remind me, and then start talking about a particular topic, and I know the topics well, so it just flows easily. People tell me that I explain the things reasonably clearly, but I feel like I'm rambling a lot of the time. But if it works for people, and the feedback that I get is fantastic, so it's great. Always great to hear that.
Yeah, it's been good. I love when you get the whiteboard out, you draw some circles and apexes and whatever. It's been pretty good. What do you think? Have any stuff that you're looking forward to in the future? Moving on with that, are you gonna? Well, actually, no. We talked about it earlier. You're gonna do this series on setup, and
so I'm gonna do the series on setup. I emailed our big email list on Driver 61 a few weeks ago to get some inspiration for questions, what people were asking. So we got like 200 questions back.
Oh, nice!
So I'm going to spend a few weeks filming the answers to those questions and put the content out on YouTube and on the website. Continue with the masterclass. It's been really, really amazing how popular it's been. We're fully booked for the next month.
How do people find that?
If they just Google Driver 61 Masterclass, it should pop up there, and the information's there. There's a little video from me explaining how it's different from normal coaching and what the benefits are. And then the drivers can inquire, and we release the dates a month before, because I only get the dates from the circuit a month before the actual date. And I'm just designing at the moment a high performance driving course as well, which won't be with me. They'll be with some Driver 61 trained instructors, but we're looking to work with performance drivers as well.
I think the course that we did, or you gave to me, I participated in, was really good. And I've done loads of different stuff with loads of different people, and there's something about this that you can't replicate on a test day, of going to somewhere like Brentingthorpe and breaking it down and you're not in the back of your mind just thinking, I just need to get faster. because you're in a completely different car in a completely different location where there are no lap times that you care about. And it's just really good to sort of take a big step back, chuck all the ego out the window, and just start and go, right, okay, this is what I don't know. Like, let's work on that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, a lot, even the guys that are winning championships that come to see me, we find some reasonably big improvements in their technique, whether it be just making the tyres last a bit longer or being more consistent or minimising the risk, as we mentioned. Doing that at Bruntingthorpe, parked under one of the planes there in a Mazda MX-5, like you say, it removes the ego. It's something completely different. There's no other cars around. So all I want to do with that course is make it as efficient and valuable for drivers as possible. And I think, I'm still learning, still changing a few little things with the course, but it's definitely it's a valuable day.
Yeah, and I think it's really good, all the free content and stuff you've put out, and it's got actual information in it. If you're just like, you might look at the title sometimes of stuff that someone's written and gone like, you get a bit and then you read it and it's just waffle. But this has got pretty much it's got all the stuff that we've talked about in there. But then you go and do the day and you start talking about it and it's the same stuff and you know it and I've read it, but when you start grinding it down to how you drive and on that day, it's such a good personal experience that kind of has to be done in person. Like, yes, you can learn a lot from reading, but I would say to everyone, try and go with, either yourself or, a driver coach and do some of that stuff, the basics, and work on your driving on a fundamental level. And you could do 15 different things in a day and, working to your vision to how you change gears or whatever. Or you could spend an entire day just on fine throttle control to balance in various scenarios. And you're still going to get tons and tons out of it. But wherever you are in your journey, you can definitely, I was a ski instructor, or used to be.
Yeah.
And that was something that people go skiing for 6 weeks and they're like, people mark how good they are at skiing by the number of weeks. Like, it's a really weird, slightly weird thing. And if people seem to pick 6 weeks, it's like, yeah, okay, I can go and get down a black run and I'm pretty good. And then they stop learning.
Yeah.
Whereas the more you know, the more you realize what you don't know. And the same with driving. Like, you must come up with people who, they might have done 100 track days or something, but they actually kind of crap. They're fast, but they don't really know what they're doing. And then you go and do one of these days and you open it all up and rip it all apart and expose all these things you don't realize about. And it really starts to cement in, and I got a lot out of it. And even though having done tons and tons before.
Oh, I'm glad that you had a good day with me. And we made some big improvements there. Yes, understanding the theory is really important, because understanding the mechanics of how the car's moving and what we're trying to achieve is definitely the first step. But then, like you say, actually putting that into practice and feeling why we should be turning the car in a certain way, why we should be looking in an area, or why we should be trail braking in a certain way, and getting the timing of the processes correct, then it's just the next level, isn't it?
Something that's very difficult on track days, and actually is quite good on a sim, because you can see all this, is track days you're not really allowed to time. Now, if you have a race car and you're on a track day, you probably have timing already in it, so you can't rip it out. Like in my Radical, it's on the steering wheel. We can't remove the steering wheel.
Yeah.
But if you just if you're just looking at your lap time, you can see that you're getting faster, but you can't necessarily see you don't see anything about why you're getting faster. And that, as I think, is something that's, if you can get it in your car somehow, specifically to split laps up, so you know, corner to corner, whether that was faster, and then you can go, well, that felt Larry, and that was X. That felt pretty chilled, and it might have been the same speed.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, okay, these are the things you're talking about and working on. But that's just something I've definitely feel like people need to, if you can, get timing.
Yeah, I mean, and it can be done reasonably.
I think
it can be done reasonably cheaply with like, have apps on the phone, Harris Lap Time, and there's a couple of other ones. The only issue with that is if you're using the GPS in the phone, it doesn't refresh quickly enough. Yeah, so it's not as accurate. But you can get a GPS module that attaches to your phone, takes it up to, I don't know, I think it's 1/10 of a second, the frequency of the position. And so then you can look at the time delta, which takes your best lap and compares it to the lap that you're on live and updates whether you're quicker or slower, as you know, Sam, 10 times a second as you're going around. So that means that you can try a different line. Or a different braking point or whatever it is into a corner and through a corner and actually see live in the situation whether you're going faster or not. Now, whether that's useful or not, well, it is, but if you've not got the capacity to actually absorb that information while you're driving the car, then it's just a distraction. So you need to make sure that you can drive the car and have a bit of spare capacity to actually look at this information and compute whether it's what it's showing you.
Yeah, and then that thing about learning the track and trying stuff. Because, I could go and, if you sent me out now and I would go to, 5 brands or something, and I'd drive around and actually, if I didn't have any input, with the knowledge I now have, I could probably chip away very slowly and hopefully see like, you get big increases at the beginning by breaking it down, and then it would get more difficult. But you would get to a point where you're just not getting faster. And that may be the point where you need to just try stuff that you don't think could be faster, or have someone else say, oh, by the way, that like you're turning right, you should be turning left.
I mean, with that, with kind of getting up to within a small percentage of the absolute lap time, there's again certain processes. So if you're trying to brake later, you need to be conscious of where you're braking, because one of the issues with some coaching on normal test days is that the coach will just say, you need to brake 5 meters later. Well, why aren't you braking 5 meters later anyway? It's because you don't have the confidence to brake that bit later. So the process is understand where you're beginning the deceleration, brake there. If you get it into the corner and you feel like there's you're going in a little bit too slow, or you make it through the corner without braking the limit, then you know that you braked at that point on the previous lap. And so you then have the confidence consciously to move a little bit deeper into the corner. It's the same for my brain. If I broke brakes where my brain was telling me to brake, it'd be 10 or 15% too early all the time. And so I have to actively say, okay, I braked there on the last lap. I'm going to go 3 meters deeper on this lap, and then go another 3 meters.
And you get that feeling of like, I'm about to be sick.
Yeah.
As you run past that initial braking point, you're like, no, I need to brake there. And then as soon as you've hit the brakes and the car starts slowing down, you're like, I'm fine.
I'm fine, exactly. And so it's getting over that mental limitation in a conscious way, in a way that actually gives you confidence rather than just guessing, or rather than just sucking it up and being brave. Driving isn't about being brave. It's about doing things in a logical process and moving those braking zones a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper.
Yeah. I've with the bravery thing, you go see people drive, someone might look out and be like, okay, that person is driving this mental car in the wet. They can't really see that much. They are bonkers. And okay, there may be a slight factor of that, but actually, how we've talked about earlier, they are running with more information than you have. Yeah. And they know where they can brake. They know various points on the track for picking up markers or whatever. They know that car, that scenario. And for them, it doesn't feel crazy. Like people that go base jumping or downhill mountain biking or whatever, they are not running on adrenaline. They're just making calculated decisions. They're just operating at a much higher level than you currently are.
Exactly. They're getting more information. They're more experienced. If you're racing and you're being brave, then firstly, you're being a bit silly. And secondly, at some point, you're going to have a crash.
Yeah. It's going to get expensive.
How soon it
might
is.
also hurt.
You're not, people say that, they're a brave driver. Well, they're not brave. They're just confident and they're driving the car properly.
Yeah. So normally at the end of these podcasts, I ask a bunch of questions. So I'm going to ask you some questions.
Okay.
Do you have a most memorable driving trip or journey? I would say like off the racetrack.
Oh my God, off the racetrack.
Yeah.
I've not done I've not done too many. Most memorable, if I'm being completely honest, I used to live in Barcelona.
Yeah.
And I went to collect all the stuff at the beginning of the year. So I went down in the van. No, I'm joking. You know what? I've not done too many like car tours, to be honest, because my life's always been racing.
Yeah.
So
Okay, we can limit it to, well, we can put it any driving. So
Any
most
driving.
memorable driving experience with mates or whatever.
Oh, it's the racing. I mean, it's the racing. I drove a Formula One car when I was 17, so that still sticks in my mind because the first time you get in an F1 car, it's exciting and a little bit scary at the same time. So that was at Donington Park, 2003, in a '97 Benetton. So it was only 6 years old at the time. And I was a skinny little 17-year-old. The thing was trying to tear my head off. So that's probably the most memorable driving that I've done. But I've not actually done too much on the road.
When you're saying you've driven a bunch of F1 cars, a whole bunch of YouTubers last year and influencer people went and drove F1 cars, and you were there as one of the coaches, weren't you?
Renault, yeah.
How I'm not. You don't have to name any names. But how is the general standard of the people that turned up?
They're all right, actually. I mean, the format of the day is they come along and they drive F4 cars at Paul Ricard for 2 20-minute sessions, and then they get in a 2012 Renault or Lotus. The chassis is actually a Lotus because when Renault bought the team afterwards, but it's painted up as a Renault, and they do incredibly well.
Because that's not much seat time in terms of just jumping into a single
just to learn Paul Ricard, it's only the 4-kilometre circuit there. But just to learn the circuit in 40 minutes is quite a task. And a lot of people have never been in a single-seater before, so then they jump in the F4 car and, they're not massively quick, but they're quicker than any road car probably that would be around.
And left foot, do you have to left foot brake in this?
You don't have to because they've got a clutch, but then in the F1 car you do have to, because you can't get across. The pedals are separated by the steering column because it goes down the middle, so you have to left foot brake in the F1 car. But the F4 cars have got a clutch, so you need to use the clutch to pull away. But once you're on the circuit, it's just paddle shift, like the Radical is.
Just like your everyday day car.
Just like your everyday day car, yeah. And the F1 car. It's got a friendly map in the clutch.
Okay.
The car's quite friendly anyway. The V8s of that era, they're not as raw as 10 or 15 years before. It's so good. That car's so good. I've driven it a few times. The car's so good that it gives you so much warning about when it's going to slide. Right. It's quite a refined place to be, especially if you compare it to a car that's 15 years older. A V10, that's got really stiff suspension. You feel every bump on the track and it feels like it wants to throw you in the barrier. The later cars are a lot more supple. But still, they're in a F1 car and, when we set them up, I'm talking to the driver to run them through all the processes, and the mechanics start the car and you just see their eyes go big. The thing's so noisy, but they do really well. Yeah, and some of them really start to push on.
Yeah, it sounds like an unreal experience. The modern cars. So you're saying, if say in broad terms, have the F1 cars got easier to drive as we get towards today? Or obviously they're not easy to drive, but because of things like suspension and stuff, are they easier to drive? Or are they still suitably absolutely nuts and just bonkers?
In general terms, I'd say yes. I've driven cars from 82 to 2013. I've not driven this latest generation of F1 cars, so I can't say anything about that. Although, the new cars are faster. This last generation of cars are faster, but they're still very refined from the looks of it. From what I hear. So yeah, they have got easier, I'd say. There's a sweet spot, I think, in terms of speed.
Yeah.
Because early 80s cars aren't massively quick, but there's a sweet spot in terms of speed and the rawness of the car. Just probably the early to the late 90s, I think, is that area where the cars are fast still.
Yeah.
Difficult to drive, very raw, and you think twice when you get in there. You're thinking about it. Whereas the later cars, you can get in, and it gives you so much feeling that you can kind of take it by its neck straight away.
Something you may not have thought about. If you could have a 5-car garage, what would you have in your 5-car garage? The only caveat is it has to sort of fit into your daily life.
Into my daily life?
You could have 4
I'm going to pick
cars
5 race cars. I would take an early 80s F1 car, like the Saudi Williams or something like that, with the ground effect. I would take a Fun Cup car.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
And I'd get a load of my mates together and... Actually, I'd take 2 Fun Cup cars. And I'd get a load of mates together and go and do the Spa 25-hour race, because it literally is like a stag party at Spa.
Yeah, awesome.
I'd have a 65 Mustang.
Okay.
Because my dad used to race classic touring cars, Lotus Cortinas. And I grew up at the racetracks and watching him race, and it was Lotus Cortinas, Minis, Anglias, Mustangs, Camaros, Falcons. I always loved the big American cars, so I'd have a 65 Mustang road car.
Right.
I think after that I'd have a T70, Lola T70.
Oh yeah.
60s Le Mans car. Because they're fantastic fun to drive, and they're just beautiful, aren't they? Like, absolutely beautiful.
What would was that 4? I think we're on 4.
I think that's 4, yeah.
Yeah. What's your you've got to drive to the track.
I'm going to sound really boring, because when you spend time on the track, you don't necessarily need anything too special to drive on the road.
I agree.
And so I'd just have something comfortable. I actually don't know what I'd have. I don't know. I like Alfa Romeos.
Okay.
I used to have an Alfa just because they're pretty.
Yeah.
I'd get something really boring and really simple. I just drive the Mazda around at the moment. I'd get a BM or a Merc or something like that. That's a really dull
something
answer.
to get you to the track.
Just to get me to the track.
Your unreal race cars.
Yeah, to get in the race cars, because you don't need to drive quickly on the road when you're in and out of race cars a lot. So. Bit of a dull answer. Sorry for that.
But that's it. That makes sense, because as someone that spends a ton of time on a racetrack driving awesome stuff, like, the road just becomes irrelevant.
Yeah, I look more at the beauty of the cars, because you get the driving experience on the track. So I like pretty cars and some classics I'd have as well.
If you could only drive one car for the rest of your life,
it would be the championship that had the best racing. Which would mean something quite cheap in racing terms. Yeah. Either the Citroen C1, Mazda MX-5, or the Fun Cup racing, because the racing's so close, and it's so many cars that it'd be one of those.
Cool. Okay. And what is the most interesting car to you at the moment? Like, could be a new car, something you've seen, or is there any car that you like Googling videos for and you're like, oh, I love that, or anything like that?
Not particularly, no. I'm just always interested in the engineering side of the cars, what they're doing with either the suspension or the engines to improve upon it, or also the classic cars, just to see the handmade panels and what it might be. So no, there's nothing that I'm particularly looking at. I'm interested. I've never driven a proper electric car, so I'm interested in having a look at a Tesla and maybe driving one of those.
Are I find them like that concept, and all the manufacturers are getting into that at the moment. And definitely, I think whenever I get rid of my M2, I don't think anytime soon, but I would look at getting an electric car as my day-to-day car. To sort of, because I don't need, there's lots of things that are benefits of the electric side, and also sort of better for the planet and all that sort of stuff. But are there any electric? Well, I know the answer to this question. But there aren't many electric race cars or race car series, are there? Obviously, there's Formula E.
Yeah, you got Formula E, and actually this year they're looking a lot more lively. You know, I think that the first generation of that car they were a little bit slow.
Yeah,
running on road tyres. They still run on road tyres, I think, but the power units just weren't strong enough. They've upgraded everything for this year, and they're looking a lot more lively. Like, they look like race cars. The things are moving around, and they look quite quick.
They definitely now look like, and performance-wise, they're sort of getting into like, oh yeah, actually they're kind of quick.
It looks more serious. But like, don't get me wrong, I'm not a huge fan of it. I still like my 1960s sports cars and all of that, and I always will, because they're just beautiful, aren't they? And the noise is fantastic. But on the road, as I've just said to you, I'm not that fussed about driving a road car like that. So I'd look at an electric vehicle. Yeah.
Because there's a couple. I think there's a couple of electric Pikes Peak cars. Have you seen them?
Yeah.
One of them turned up at Goodwood, the Peugeot.
Yeah.
Like, just the mental weapon, I think.
They're incredible, aren't they? I mean, I think they must use them on Pikes Peak because of the torque that the electric motor gives you. And
it pulls us at the top, and altitude-wise,
yes,
they pull as hard at the top as they do at the bottom.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Whereas I think a normal, people always run turbocharged cars, they're like down 40% power or something ridiculous by the time they get to the top.
Yeah.
But then from watching people drive these, like that Peugeot, for example, it almost looks like you have to drive it very different to most cars because it can do things. Like the way that the torque vectoring, it can individually brake any wheel at any time, up to 1,000 million times a second, or put reverse power or forward power. I remember hearing Elon Musk talk about traction control in like a Model S, and he was saying the difference between a car like that driving over some ice and a normal car driving over some ice. A normal car can only just brake wheels. That's it. And it can only do it at a certain amount of time, and it has a certain amount of sensors in it. Whereas an electric car has basically infinite control of each wheel in any direction with any amount of force at any time, and can sense tiny, tiny amounts of slip in a wheel and adjust it straight away. Whereas a traditional traction control system relies on there being a certain amount of slip before it can adjust to it and whack it out. So he was saying, like, if you just drive a Tesla down like an icy road, it just drives down the icy road.
Yeah, I'm sure that you have a lot more control in what the wheel's actually doing, and so that will make it safer. And in terms of the Pikes Peak cars, will make it faster. In terms of driving, I guess it's a really strange thing to drive because you have to begin to understand what the computer's doing to get the most out of it.
Yeah.
And that might be completely different in terms of technique to what we would use in a traditional car with traditional suspension and just being driven at one end or four-wheel drive.
Yeah,
so
you get your engineers coming in and being like, you need to do this. You're like, that doesn't make sense. They're like, but it'll be faster.
Yeah, I mean, it would have happened before in Formula One with the active cars. You would have been having to drive those in a different way.
Yeah.
But as a driver, that's, you adapt to what you've got, and that's where the difference is between a good and a great driver.
Cool. Well, that sort of wraps us up. I don't know how long that was. I feel like it was actually quite a long time. So hopefully it's all recorded. I think we've got one camera that's turned off. One's still going. But thanks very much for coming along. It's been good to have you here. And I'm sure I'll see you at some track at some point in time.
Cheers, Sam. Thank you.